Hi everyone, it's Caitlin from Really Big Plant. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Really big plant.
For this video, we're gonna be doing another episode of Plant Chores. We're gonna have the usual hodgepodge of a whole bunch of different things. Begonia maculata that I wanna propagate. Huge Monstera adansonii, which is also growing some huge mushrooms. I have some pruning to do, a couple of plants that I want to repot. Let's get into it. Here, I have a vanilla planifolia. It's the variegated vanilla orchid with the yellow variegated stripe down the middle. I'm really excited to have it. What I'm gonna do now is I want to repot it. And part of the reason why I'm repotting this is because I've noticed that the orchids that I do have introduced a new pest into my life, and that is snails. Bush snails in particular. Like, they're really, really tiny, and when I first started seeing them, I didn't even know what they were. But when you look close, you can see that they have a little swirl on the shell, and they're definitely snails. So this is a Phalaenopsis, formerly Doritis, pulcherrima marmorata. It's got this really beautiful modeling on the leaves. They're like little polka dots. I think that this is so cool. Anyway, I noticed a few weeks after having it that the roots started to develop some kind of damage that I couldn't recognize. I didn't know what it was. I'd never seen anything like it before. There were like these little black spots forming, but they weren't like fungal spots or anything like that. They were more like something had been taking bites out of the roots, like something small. And I realized that that's exactly what it was. They were snails that were coming through and munching on all of the roots of this orchid. And so there were more exposed roots on the top. But one day when I watered it, I checked back on the plant like an hour after watering, and there were there were dozens of snails. There were so many snails all over the surface of the pot, because they tend to come out when you water the plant because they don't want to drown, and they look for the surface, kind of like worms when it rains. So they tend to come to the surface, and I saw how bad it was and that there were so many snails, and everything sort of made sense all at once. All of the damage I'd been seeing on the roots was because of these little snails, which are now my enemy. So I'm sorry I did this before the video. I took some footage. I took away all of the medium when I repotted it, and I let all of the roots and the base of the plant soak in a hydrogen peroxide solution for like half an hour. And actually the plant seemed to have really enjoyed it too. I feel like I can't describe to you exactly what it is, but like when you know your plants, you know when they're super happy, and I could tell that this plant perked up and got way happier after I did that hydrogen peroxide soak. So I'm really glad to have done that, and I'm about to follow suit with this vanilla orchid. I've got this bag here that I'm gonna use just to dump the old medium into. I also have gloves, which I don't think you've seen me wear before. I wear gloves sometimes, and it's usually only if I'm really grossed out by a pest situation on the plant. And I'm gonna be honest with you guys, the snails are freaking me out. Like, I don't know what it is about them, but I am very disturbed by the snails, and I really don't want to touch them. I don't know, maybe it's that like you crunch them to kill them. I'm just not having it with these snails. So I'm changing out the medium, and hopefully this plant will be snail free. So I've got a little root system. It's cute. Roots are all rinsed off now, and I think looking pretty good. I'm gonna just put it into this jar, and I'm gonna soak the roots with hydrogen peroxide. I'm using this 3% hydrogen peroxide. 3% hydrogen peroxide is extremely safe, and you actually don't have to dilute it for use on your plants, but you definitely can. I think the ratio that I've seen people say to use for a root soak is a tablespoon of hydrogen peroxide to a cup of water. But in reality, you can use this 3% solution without diluting it further, and it's gonna be fine on your plants. So when I do this kind of thing, I usually just start by pouring some straight solution, 3% solution, into my plant cup. And then I just have this little other jar that I brought over with some plain tap water that I'm gonna use to just top off the remaining volumes. So it doesn't have to be super exact, but basically as long as you start seeing bubbling happen along the surface of the roots, you've probably added in enough hydrogen peroxide. Like within the first minute or two, you should see a lot of bubbles inside on your roots. The reason why I chose to do this activity first is because I'm actually gonna let this soak for like half an hour this way, and then we're gonna come back to it and do the repotting. Okay, so the next thing that I'm gonna do now is I'm going to propagate this Begonia maculata from my mom. So it is, I believe, the only begonia in my collection. Other begonias? No, yeah, this is my only begonia. It's the spotted begonia. So maculata means spotted. It shares the same root with the word immaculate, which literally means spotless. So any plant that you see that has maculata or maculose or something like that in the title means that you probably are going to see morphological characteristics that in some way have spots. So I think that this plant is so cool that it's got these maculations, the spots on it that are kind of silvery, and in lower light they can even act like reflectors. So I got this a while ago. It wasn't in great shape when it arrived to me, and I also put this in my grow tent. Basically, the grow tent was not a good environment for this begonia. I think it was too bright of a light condition, and I was not watering it frequently enough, and a lot of stuff happened that was pretty much, you know, all my fault. I take full responsibility for this begonia looking like this. Like, it was big once, and it kind of fried up and died back to very few leaves. I've been taking better care of it, and it more recently has started to grow a ton of new leaves. I'm gonna propagate this plant for my mom. My mom, she doesn't have a whole lot of plants, but she asked me specifically about this polka dot plant and wanted to know if I had one, and she was on the hunt for a Begonia maculata. So of course I'm gonna propagate some of my plant for her. My family lives in a different state, and so I'm not actually gonna be giving these propagations to my mom for another like 3+ months, which is actually great because it gives me a ton of time to take cuttings and grow them into a more established plant. I'm actually going to chop the ugly growth off and start those as the propagations. These leaves are on their way out already, and when you propagate a plant, the leaf that is going to grow the new plant is, in my mind, sort of like a sacrificial leaf. It's gonna wither away, it's gonna die. I don't try to have high expectations for the original growth on a propagation to stay healthy for that long, because the new plantlets that grow from a propagation do tend to borrow and take a lot of the energy away from whatever is sustaining that leaf. So for that reason, I'm going to start these propagations from the yucky part of the plant because I've got 3 months plus to grow these out. So if I were seeing my mom sooner and was gonna give this propagation to her within the next month or so, I would take cuttings from the nicer part of the plant. I think it's kind of a win-win situation that I can start with the damaged leaves and create a whole new undamaged plant for my mom while also keeping these new leaves for myself. I also still have plenty of time to revisit this plant and take some snippings from these newer leaves if necessary. Now we're left with this, and I think we're looking pretty good. I've got these 2 pieces. I definitely don't need this long of a piece of stem on each of these in order to propagate them, so I'm actually going to do a little bit of wet stick propagation. So if you've been watching my channel, I think I've mentioned wet stick propagation without explaining it a couple of times. It's when you take a cutting of a stem where there are nodes but no leaves present, and it's usually a pretty hit or miss propagation method because normally having a leaf present is necessary because it's like the solar panel for the propagation that allows the propagation to make energy in order to make new growth. And so when you start with just a little cutting of stem that doesn't have any leaf on it, you're relying on that tiny little piece of stem to do all of the things. It needs to put out a whole bunch of different types of growth. It's got to grow roots from one part, and it's got to grow a new leaf bud from somewhere else. It's a lot of work to ask a leafless little piece of stem to do. So it's something that people in the plant community call wet stick propagation. And it can be kind of hit or miss, but sometimes it's also a great success. And I feel like it's always worth it to try if you have a chunk of stem, because you know, worst case scenario, nothing happens with it, but best case scenario, you have a whole new plant from something that you thought was a piece of garbage. First, I'm gonna just take the sections that I want to propagate for the top. And then I'm just gonna stick these into the jar of water. Okay, so now I'm just gonna show you how I do the wet stick propagations. So I've got these 2 saucers. They were lids from takeout, but I like to save them because I like to use them for trays underneath my plants and also for propagations like this. Sphagnum moss. I just make a little bed of moss. This is just water. I just pour some water in. Let the moss soak it up. Then what I'm gonna do is just take these cuttings, but I'm just gonna separate these into some sections that seem like a reasonable size to me. This is, again, really subjective. So I've got this piece which has 3 nodes on it, this piece which has 2 nodes, and then these 2 all with 1 node. And so then now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna lay them down in the moss, and then I take the other tray thing that I have and just stick it on top. And I'm just gonna set them and forget them until I start to see something happen. Whenever I do something like this, I really don't get my hopes up for them to have a successful propagation. So no guarantees on this. Best case scenario, this will create 4 new plants. Actually, best case scenario, it'll sprout from every single node and there will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 new plants, but that's really, really wishful thinking. So hopefully at least one of these decides to grow. I have this Monstera adansonii here. It's pretty big. I'm really proud of this plant. I actually grew this plant from a whole bunch of cuttings and it's huge now. I'm in love with it. I just noticed the other day that this plant is growing the largest mushrooms that I have ever had grow in my plant collection. They are massive and totally disgusting and horrifying, and they really, really need to go. They're down here. You can probably see them from this far away. It's that white stuff right in there. Those are huge mushrooms. So there's something really, really disgusting about finding mushrooms in your plants, in my opinion. The good news is they tend to not really be problematic for your plants and tend to not have really an effect on the plant's health unless you let the mushroom population get totally out of control. The one thing that does worry me about finding mushrooms in my plants is that they do tend to be pretty contagious. Mushrooms reproduce by spores, and when I see them, I kind of freak out because I feel like all the plants nearby are gonna get mushrooms. And it's not like a pest, but it's just something that is definitely a nuisance, and I guess, as I've been saying, I just think it's really gross. So I need to get these mushrooms out of here. What are you supposed to do when you find mushrooms? The answer is you want to just try to get rid of them. It's a manual removal process. And if it's really, really problematic, you probably are going to want to repot your plant and change out 100% of the potting mix. They can have tiny spores that live in the soil and pop up when you least expect it, when the weather gets a little bit more humid, which is, I think, what happened here. It got pretty humid all of a sudden, and this plant decided to pop up some mushrooms. This is a big plant, and I really don't want to repot it right now. So I'm just going to do my best to try to remove the mushrooms from the surface and try to just take out maybe a little bit of the soil with it if it seems like that's feasible. So yeah, this is really gross. I'm gonna get my gloves on again. I'm gonna just be immediately disposing of the mushrooms into this bag. So when you pull out the mushrooms, you should not let them sit around because they have the spores that can lead to them being contagious into your other plants. So you wanna just dispose of them immediately. Okay, here we go. I'm literally sweating with nervousness because I think that this is so disgusting. Okay, so I think I got them all out. Yeah, I think I got them all out. So I'm taking off my gloves. And now I've got this little spray bottle that I put some alcohol in, and I'm just gonna really lightly spray the surface of the soil where the mushrooms were. You don't wanna go overboard with this because this can definitely kill your plants. It's like almost 100% rubbing alcohol, but if I just lightly mist the soil, it's sort of like a peace of mind thing where I just feel like I'm killing off whatever little bits of mushroom I might have left behind. Just did a few little spritzes. Like you really don't want to go too crazy, and try not to spritz the leaves if possible. Disgusting. Okay, up next, we have a really quick little task. I'm just gonna be chopping the flower off of this peace lily. So this is a Paphiopedilum, and the cultivar name is Platinum Mist, and it's called that because it has this really beautiful light coloration to the leaves. Like the center of the leaves have this burst of like silver. Well, it's not exactly silver, but in comparison to a plain green leaf, it's a little bit silvery. So I think it's a really beautiful peace lily and tends to not be too fussy for me and is pretty easy to take care of. I was keeping it in my bedroom in a location where it was getting some very bright light, and it was kind of unhappy all the time, and I moved it into a lower light location, and it's been doing a lot better, looking perkier, and even grew a flower recently. So I'm gonna be cutting this flower off because I worry about how the pollen could affect my little dog. Lily pollen poisoning is a really big deal for cats, and it can be totally fatal. It's really serious. It only takes a couple little granules of the peace lily pollen to send your cat to the hospital. So in that regard, peace lilies are really not very peaceful at all. And I like to just have the practice of cutting the blooms off of my peace lily. And I know that that's kind of upsetting to some people, but I'd rather not risk it. Some dogs have been known to have bad reactions to the lily pollen poison, and I have a feeling that one time my dog did get really sick from some pollen from this particular peace lily when I wasn't cutting the flowers off of it. His water bowl was kind of near it, and one day he was just being really, like, there was something wrong with him. Like, he was like hallucinating, and that's one of the side effects of the lily pollen poisoning. So ever since that happened, I cut these flowers off pretty much right away. So this is the bloom. They're an inflorescence, and they are the signature of the peace lily. The good news is about these blooms, if you do have cats or pets and this is something you're concerned about, it takes a while for them to actually start producing pollen. So this flower is developed, it's been developing over the past like week or so, and I've been enjoying it, but I've noticed that it just is starting to reach the stage where it might start making pollen soon, and so I definitely want to eliminate it before that point. But you can still enjoy the flowers for a short time before they become totally toxic. I've let this flower last for a few days, and now I'm gonna cut it off. So I've got my scissors here. There's nothing like too special you should know about removing the flower. I usually like to cut them pretty close to where the flower stem joins the leaf stem. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say goodbye to this flower. It's a little bit sad, but my dog's health is so much more of a priority. These flowers are gone. Okay, so now I'm ready to pot up the vanilla orchid finally. It's been soaking in this hydrogen peroxide solution. It's gotten a chance to get nice and bubbly in there, and I feel confident that if there were any snail eggs hiding in the little root system, they are eliminated now. So I'm gonna just be using a mixture of orchid bark, and I'm gonna be using some perlite, and I might mix in a little bit of sphagnum moss as well. And I'm gonna use this little stake, which is just a little cooking skewer that I wrapped in rope. It's like a little bit of twine. And I made this for a different plant that no longer needs it. Okay, there you have it. My repotted little variegated vanilla orchid. Hooray! I'm really, really excited to have this. I've been on a quest for vanilla for like a long time, so now I just feel really good about getting this all staked up and situated to become a really big plant someday. And then I just wanted to show you, so this is a Paphiopedilum, also known as a lady slipper orchid. And it's not a particular species, it's actually a hybrid. So it's a Paphiopedilum callosum hylophire crossed with a Paphiopedilum hyloruby number 2. I picked this plant out specifically because of its foliage. It's got this really remarkable patterning on there. I don't even know how to describe what the pattern looks like. It's really, really cool. The bud was fully formed and it was just starting to open up, and I brought it home on an airplane with great care, and I was really worried that the flower was gonna get super damaged, but it actually successfully opened, and I'm just obsessed with it. It's so cool. I love the dark, dark color of the flower, and there's this sort of like a hint of a really bright neon green. I just think that everything about this plant is so striking and cool. I'm really excited to have this one. I just wanted to show it to you because I think it's really cool. I haven't repotted this one yet. I've been really eyeing it and I haven't seen any snails in it so far. I feel like I probably just jinxed that. Now, it's been doing really well and I'm just leaving it alone. I kind of didn't want to mess with it because it is in bloom right now. All right, everyone. Thank you so, so much for watching this video today. If you have already liked this video and subscribed to my channel, I just want to say thank you so much. I would love to hear from you on how you felt about some of these topics, whether you were horrified by me cutting the flower off my peace lily, what your experiences have been like propagating begonia. I would also love to hear your thoughts on mushrooms and what you do to handle the mushroom situation. Shoot, okay, I just remembered that I wanted to show you these propagations of this philodendron burl marks. Nothing too fancy going on here. This is just like a bunch of cuttings that I have in this cup. But I forgot I wanted to talk to you about it when I was doing the begonia wet stick propagation. This burl marks philodendron non-variegated version was originally just one plant and it grew really, really tall. It got ridiculous and it just kept falling over. So I decided to chop it all up, and it actually had a really long stem that all the leaves have fallen off of. I was gonna make another little bed of moss like I did for the begonia cuttings, but you know, this plant is pretty common and I actually already have a lot of cuttings here in this cup, and I don't know if I really care to invest a bunch of effort in trying to keep this stick alive. So what I'm gonna do with this wet stick piece, which has several nodes and lots of little aerial roots on it already, I'm just gonna do the laziest thing imaginable, and I'm just gonna stick it in this cup with all of the water propagations too and just see if it does something. It's more likely to rot that way, but because I'm not super invested in what happens to this, I'm just sticking it in the cup. Anyway, I thought I would just show that to you too. So there you have it, another huge wet stick. This one is super wet, it's just straight in water, and we'll see what happens with this guy. Also, look at my BMO cup. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.